For many of us, when we eat a meal, if it stirs emotion in us, we may say, I like it. If we're interested to think more, we'll delve into this style of cooking, and when we eat it next, we might say, I like that. It tastes of Italian spice. If we further investigate and aim to cultivate our powers of discernment even more, the next time we eat the dish, we might say, I love this. I can taste the oregano and the sweet basil and that undertone of nutmeg. Wonderful. It's like that with this great silence that hits us when we're in the wilderness. If we like it, we think more about it. We consider what it is we like about it. And in doing so, we become aware that it's not really silence at all, but there is in fact a noise there. And then, if we work harder on our discernment, we discover that it's not a single noise, but several. Perhaps a breath of wind, a lap of water, or something fainter, a woodpecker way back in the forest, chattering away to itself. Or perhaps a pine sawyer beetle boring into a fallen log, or further away, a bear padding between the pines, or even closer but nearly out of our human wavelength, the pulse of life, the magnetism that connects us all. Or maybe the trees are murmuring their contentment to each other. No pests are near, they say. No need to emit electrical warning charges or chemical weaponry to shoo away the bugs. Or maybe that's what they say, I'm unsure. I only suspect that this wilderness silence is not a silence, and that it may be a collection of sounds that my ears just aren't, and may never be, tuned into, and that perhaps my understanding of that noise will only ever be that it's the vacuum that's left when you take something man-made, familiar and overwhelming away. Mum says that, like all mothers in England of the time, she put me outside in my pram soon after I was born to take the air for hours on end. That was in the spring of 1968. Dino, who was our collie dog, he was a wild one, the sort of dog who'd disappear for days when the season was right. No kennel could keep him in or out. Yet for the first year of my life he'd apparently lost his taste for the ladies and instead stood vigil by my pram out there in the paved front yard, warning off all cats, birds and whatever else he thought might be out to harm me. Then later, early in 1969, just as I was able to move on my own, Mum says, I crawled straight into Dino's bed in the corner of the kitchen and spent most of the next few months in there with him. I don't know what that dog communicated to me during this formative time, but knowing me as I do now, I've hit my 50s, I think it's not outrageous to surmise that more than a bit of what I am today is due to the untamable attitude and passion that ran through his beautiful soul like the winds of springtime. How many ways can we say the same thing? As many ways it seems as we need to, in order to shift from this paradigm to the next. The stories we live have no beginning and no end. Each thought we think, each word we speak is either a seed that's drifted to us from someplace or a seed that's drifting off someplace. Do we ever truly get to know who gave us them or who takes them from us? Not really. That's okay, that's life. But this film here, this isn't life, it's just a portrayal of it, a story, and living as we do in a 21st century that's still clinging desperately to the crumbs of the Middle Ages, we tend to fix our stories solidly in place with talk of beginning, middle and end so as to compartmentalise them in our hearts, our heads and in our actions. So to fit in with the world of people, I'll start this particular story once again. Not in the spring of 1968, but in August 2017, which was the last time I ever saw Dad. I'd walked into the small candlelit room alone. The undertaker had led me to the door. He'd told me to take my time. Dad had been dead for over 3 weeks. I've done my best to fix up your father, the guy had said, but time waits for nobody. You should be prepared. I'd walked in, kept my eyes to the front on the coffin lid that stood upright in the corner, the gold plate engraved with George Colin Wise, 1933, 2017. I saw my own name there, 1968 to what date? How long did I have? The thought lasted as long as it should do, a few seconds, dismissed as unimportant. Not just now, but forever. How do you make the gods laugh? Tell them your plans. How do you make them laugh even more? Take your eyes off the present. They offer us up the true gift of life, and we continually insist on looking away. How they must giggle. I knew that when I turned around, I'd see Dad for the last time. I felt that the moment should be important. I turned and there he was. It didn't seem like Dad. I could understand why people think that these bodies we have are just vehicles. That we have a soul, a place where our life force resides. Or maybe this was just Dad, the vehicle, the whole. Just Dad with his wheels fallen off. I don't know. I thought there must be a message for me in this moment, this final moment. I thought I could feel one coming. Maybe I was just thinking of what he would have said or what I'd want him to say if he could. So little is certain. Dad had been telling me all my young life to tidy up my room, but now the message was a little softer and of wider scope. Dave, learn how to leave the place a bit better than how you found it. And whatever you want to do with all that learning, remember you've not got much time to do it in. Simple thoughts. Powerful thoughts. What did I want to do with what might remain of this short life that I had left? I've been acting with this question in mind ever since. 2019 was the year I was to become a Canadian citizen. It seemed foolish to become a citizen of a country that I'd hardly seen though. I'd been so busy trying to earn money in Toronto that I'd experienced little of my new country. What were the people like out of the city? What was the landscape like? What was its feeling? My job was inflexible, wouldn't give me time to do what I needed to. I knew it was important to earn money, but I could do that back in England. If I was to be in Canada, it made sense to really be in Canada. So in May of 2019, I quit my job and went canoeing in Algonquin National Park. I sensed a new feeling here. A new sort of silence. I'd been in deserts, mountains and forests all over the world, yet Algonquin was different. Or perhaps I'd become a different sort of receptor lately. Maybe I was more discerning now than when I'd walked across the Sinai and the Sahara as a young man. I loved that canoeing trip, yet having returned to Toronto, something unsettled me about the Algonquin experience. Why hadn't I been able to just sit in that silence? I'd always been looking to do something with it, to write about it, film it, record it, talk about it, transmit it, to be physically active in it. Why couldn't I just be in it? The birds were able to, the bears were able to, even Dino, our old dog with his great lust for life, he would have been able to, as long as it was the right season, of course. The French philosopher Pascal had once said that all our human troubles stem from our inability to sit quietly. Thinking of that in conjunction with my Algonquin experience, well, the fact that I couldn't just sit with myself in silence took on enormous importance. And the fact that most people had the same problem was of no solace. What was wrong with me? Us. And how could I fix it? I spent the summer studying the scriptures of the major religions. I took a yoga teacher training course and I read all I could about Tom Thompson, who'd painted Algonquin so very well back in the early 20th century and was seen as a sort of spiritual woodsman as well as an artist. Then in September 2019, just when the people and the bugs had left Algonquin in peace, I returned with a friend to explore once again this very special silence. I'm torn between just looking at the still lake and getting out onto it in the canoe. I've canoed so often in rough weather that my experience tells me that a still surface shouldn't be passed up, but I stick around on the rocks. This sitting still is a new experience for me. I'm here to try to learn how to sit with myself, to explore this silence which I'm sure is not a silence. So I sit, I look, I am. The parable of Nasruddin springs to mind when he lost his front door key inside his house and began searching for it outside in the street because there was more light out there to see by. It occurs to me as I sit looking at a perfect scene that succeeds in failing to inspire me. If we are to connect with ourselves, there's little use looking for happiness outside. Although sometimes I disagree and words are just words, because outside might just be the place to go if you're not a fearful settler who views life from behind a door, a wall, or a barrier. Algonquin offers a chance to ponder, a crack in the door perhaps, with which to find your key. The story of Boethius edges forward from my memories. Boethius, the Roman senator and philosopher who created the Stoic masterpiece Consolation of Philosophy whilst in a cell, waiting to be executed. What might we create if we knew it was to be our last word? Morning meditation. I feel the world changing as I do the 108 breath count. The sun rises over the hills, warming. The birds, so lively at dawn, quieten as our peninsula heats up. I feel insects on my neck. I consider how our orbits mix. Rarely do we see the extent of our individual orbits in life. Rarely do we think of when we'll last meet a person or an animal or a place. Our progression through life can seem so infinite, and yet there will be a cloaked finale for each and every thing I've ever known. I know that. It's best to treat all meetings as our last, and this means gentleness. My friend is good company as we canoe. He sees all natural sights with the wonder of an enthusiastic 1960s child and wants to travel as slowly as possible because he sees that the spaces in between the events have as much to show and teach us as the events themselves. And this is right, for Algonquin is deserving of such an attitude. I'm impatient early in the journey, but I try to sit next to concepts that annoy me these days, and upon reflection I see that my rushing about makes no sense. It's right that we take our time to view the trees that decorate each peninsula, or the rocks cutting diagonally into the still lakes, or juvenile birds, or brown spiky crests and hurried paddling their parents on the lake, far away washing, preening, splashing about, crazy like a loon. This silence, this is the domain of the pine, the bear, the chipmunk, the dragonfly. If we would understand them, I think we must feel the canoe across the way and know only that it is an outsider and as such must be treated with suspicion. To know their world, you must live in their silence, you must exist in their silence. A white butterfly, just a little too close to the reflection of the sun, touching down on the still lake surface. I watch the flutters of its death throe. I've a feeling that it's not going down without a shout, but this final roar is to my clumsy ears a silence. The life-giving sun glitters, the wings slow. The only wind acts merely as a relief from the heat. I'm uninspired to move. With great effort I swim. It's enough to sit drying off, watching a distant loon, devoid of any feeling of missing out or wanting to put handprints on a cave wall. I've no wish to create. I worry it won't last, but for now, this is advancement. Dozing before the campfire, I realised something of what I value in Tom Thompson's paintings. In his work, I see a person who has gazed into 1,001 campfires. The sights that wow you when you first enter the wilderness are still visible in his paintings, but there's also the soul of a man who sees majesty. Majesty and equality, equality and strength, possibilities and greatness. There is a curtain aching to be pulled aside when the silent has touched you, I feel, when solitude adds a silver tint to your blood. It shows in Tom's paintings as it showed in the writing of Paul Bowles. I fall asleep to the quivering call of the loon and the haunting echo of a distant response. Dad and I never discuss religion, politics or death, so I don't know his thoughts of any of this or on life really, but perhaps it's all as simple as it seems. It's just about kindness and stillness and love, and it's not any more complicated than that. Just last month I deleted most of the accounts I follow on my Instagram, and I focused just on the accounts of a few sources of wisdom, one of which was that of the Dalai Lama. I was expecting great words from him, I suppose, and for 3 weeks I was disappointed because all I saw were photos of him greeting people and smiling. And then one morning I woke to see yet another image of him patting a young boy on the cheek and smiling, and I understood finally that this was the message, that all the words are by the by, of little importance when placed next to the main thing, and that is that you just need to be genuine, to take time to really see people, to smile at them, to converse in a civil manner, to act as if we are all one. Kindness, it's often not the most glamorous act in the room, and it rarely repays us with dramatic emotions, with waterfalls of tears or wild applause, but understanding its delicate rewards. This is the lesson. Silence. I've spoken often about it, about wanting to be able to sit in it, to understand it. But first, I think to hear it, I have needed to negotiate the feeling of lack, the absence of motors, the absence of electrical hum, of frightened human chit chat, of birds and trees calling oddly and screaming as a result of light pollution and unnatural living conditions in the city. It's what I'm used to and perhaps feel comfy with, this terrible symphony of the city conducted by the devil. But here, that's all missing. There's a hole, and it feels odd. An oddness that blossoms into a wonderful feeling of lack. If you get used to it, then the game begins. Do I hear nothing because there is nothing? Or are my senses dulled? How often I've asked that. I still don't have an answer. But I can hear a leaf fall now after 4 days here. It's a beginning. And what is that throb? The ebbing in from somewhere else, a wave from where to where? It's rapid, a pulse, a second, my blood, my heartbeat? That's too easy. And there's an internal tinnitus feel to it. It's not my ears, but back inside my head, around the position of a third eye, midway between and just above the top of my neck and the back of my throat. Words, understandably, thankfully, fade. Big ideas form and die. Butterfly lifespans. Futility meets fatalism meets understanding that more than anything I need to learn how to be fully the person who sits still and is able to listen. It's true that social media only presents a minimal image of real life. If your online feed truly reflects your life cannot do anything else but surpass your feed. For this film of moonrise viewed in a few seconds on a small screen can never portray the half hour spent watching moonrise by this silent lake. Morning meditation. At times I rush my breath, then remind myself that it's likely that at some stage I'll be asking for just one more, so I best savour it whilst I can. Every thought I have seems to have been blown my way, and is just a seed of those who came before. Is there any chance of being completely me, without influence? Can I ever completely close off from them all? I think when the striving stops, then yes, it is possible, and it is then when I will be in a position to become useful.